Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Mohyuddin Mirza, your host for the program Food for Thought. I'm glad you are enjoying this program. We recently got several emails on the different topics we have been providing to our audience. This time on this program, we are very delighted that we are going to talk on a world-renowned expert on the subject of obesity. A little bit of introduction of Dr. Arya Sharma, and later on we'll introduce you to him as well. Is a world recognized as one of the leading obesity experts. He has authored or co-authored more than 250 articles on the management of obesity and related cardiovascular disorders. He has lectured extensively all over the world. Just before we started the program, I was talking to him that he was in the Middle East and has traveled extensively in that area. He was recently appointed Professor of Medicine and Chair of Obesity Research and Management at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. He is also the Scientific Director of the Canadian Obesity Network. He further uses his expertise as a leading obesity expert as the Medical Director of Edmonton Capital Health Region Interdisciplinary Weight-Wise Program. As a leading expert in obesity, Dr. Sharma passionately believes in educating the public on this chronic disease. He writes a blog as well, and I have gone to that blog and will give you his address later on. And even if you type the word Dr. Arya Sharma, it will take you to that blog as well. Dr. Sharma, welcome. Thank you very much for making time available. I know you're a very busy person. When I tried to contact you and within a few minutes I got the email, I was just so happy. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you, that on your pursuit of this subject of obesity, you were in Germany before, working there, and then came to Edmonton. What year was that?
Well, I came to Edmonton in 2008. I came to Canada in 2002,
Right,
and prior
right.
to that I was working in Berlin,
Right, right.
where I did most of my medical training. And my initial training was as in internal medicine and nephrology.
Right, right.
And I practiced as a nephrologist before coming to Canada.
Right.
But my research work, but also my clinical interest took me
Right,
more and
right.
more towards dealing with obesity and related problems.
Right. So let's start with what is obesity. Even I think I have some knowledge of few things in there, but when I start looking at obesity and overweight, so what's a good definition for our audience? What is obese person, or what is obesity?
Yeah. Obesity, the way that I look at it, is having excess weight that
Right.
affects your health.
Right,
So just having a few pounds of extra fat in your body does
Right.
not make you obese. But when that extra weight starts affecting your health because it is starting to increase your risk for diabetes, high blood pressure, liver disease, sleep apnea, and this long list of problems that you can get
just with the extra
just
fat.
with the extra fat. When you start having those problems,
Right,
then we can speak of obesity. And now we know that there are some people who, when they gain 5 pounds,
right,
start having problems.
Right.
And there are other people who can gain 20 pounds and not have problems. And that's why it is very difficult to give an exact cutoff to say,
Right,
you
right,
know,
yeah.
if you're here, you have
Right,
obesity, if you're
right,
here, you don't,
right,
because it is a gradual increase.
right,
The World Health Organization definition of obesity uses the body mass index, which
Right,
is
right.
a number you can calculate based
Right.
on your height and weight.
right,
And when your body mass index is over 30,
Yeah.
we normally say that you're clinically obese. Now, the number 30, however, applies to Caucasians. When you talk about people
So
from
BMI, the body mass index,
yes,
is a number.
it's a number. It's actually a quotient. It's the ratio between your
Height, weight.
weight in relationship to your height.
Is it simple to calculate? I mean, I could easily calculate it, or
It's easier to do if you have a calculator. What you take is your height,
Right.
your weight in kilograms, and
Right.
divide it by your height in meters,
okay.
and divide that number again by height in meters,
Oh, I
because
see.
it is
okay.
height in meters squared,
Square. Okay. Okay.
and that gives you a number,
Okay.
and that number is your BMI.
Okay, I see. And number of 30 is considered
30 for Caucasians
right.
is considered the cutoff.
Right.
When you talk about South Asians, so
Right.
people coming from the Indian Peninsula or those parts of
Asia,
the
yeah,
world,
right, yeah.
even East Asia, you're talking about obesity starts at about 25.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right,
all
because
right.
there is more susceptibility for some of these problems.
Right, right. On your blog, when I was browsing through, I saw that your definition is what you described. But overweight is generally fat plus muscles plus everything, total weight. Is that?
Yeah, see, and that is one of the problems with just getting on a scale, because when you just get on the scale, you're
Right.
measuring everything. Like
Exactly.
you measure bone, you measure
Right.
muscle, you measure
Right.
fat, you measure the fluid that's in your body,
Right,
all those
everything
things, right?
together, yeah.
But it is an approximation. Most
Right.
people,
Right,
when their BMI is over 30,
right,
unless they're some kind of an extreme athlete
right,
and
right,
have a lot of big muscles,
right, right,
are actually fat.
right.
I mean, that's the bottom line. And if
Right.
you did more sophisticated analysis of body composition, you would find that most people with a BMI of 30 have more body fat than someone who has a BMI of 25.
Is there a level of normal fat, we call it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the normal range in men, you would say that the normal range for men is about 20% body fat.
Okay,
For women, it's about 30% body fat.
okay, I
Right.
see.
And in fact, we know that if you reduce your body fat to below that,
Right, right.
you will also have problems.
Really?
And you see that happening, for example, in people who are extreme athletes,
Right,
or
yeah,
people who
yeah.
are anorexic or
Right.
dieting extremely. You will
Right.
find that there are health problems
Right,
that
right,
you can get if you do not have enough body fat.
right, right. And is it this body fat is deposited in certain areas?
Yeah, but you have to think of body fat as energy stores,
Okay.
right?
So fat is the source of energy.
It can be the source of
Okay.
energy. It's actually a storage organ for energy. That's the
But
function
does
of body
it come
fat.
before sugar is used by the body, or?
It's not before the sugar comes. So think of it this way: that if you eat more calories than your
Right.
body uses,
Right.
then you have to put those extra calories somewhere.
So they are stored.
And so they get converted into fat, and that fat gets stored in your fat tissue,
Right.
most of which is underneath your skin. And so we call this subcutaneous fat. So when you pinch
Right, right.
underneath your skin,
Right.
that is subcutaneous fat, or that is skin fat. And that is actually the best place to store extra calories, because otherwise what do you do with them? They will
Exactly.
just float around,
Yeah,
and they'll
yeah.
cause problems.
Yeah,
And so,
right, yeah.
so that's where the extra fat goes. Now, unfortunately, in some people, the extra calories do not just go into the skin fat,
Right.
but they go into the belly fat.
Okay.
And you start storing that
Right,
fat in
right,
other organs,
right,
which
yeah.
includes inside the stomach,
Right.
inside your liver, in your pancreas, in your muscle cells, and that's when the fat starts causing problems.
Okay. All right.
Right.
All right. So and this varies between male and female, or men or women.
Yeah,
the
men are much more likely to deposit extra calories in their stomach, in their liver, etc.
Right.
And so you speak of the male pattern obesity,
Right,
or the
exactly.
apple form,
Yeah.
right? Central obesity.
Right.
Versus women tend to put most of the fat around the hips,
Right.
around the thighs. That's where most of the fat goes.
Right. Right.
But you find crossover. You find men who have a lot of subcutaneous fat,
Right,
and you
right.
can find women who have large bellies and
Right.
put the fat inside
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And there is a clear relationship between the amount of fat that you're carrying inside your abdomen
Right. Okay.
and your risk for heart disease.
And you mentioned that calories to fat. So, just to give an idea to our audience, how many calories extra will make 1 pound of fat?
Yeah. So 1 pound of fat is approximately 3,500 calories.
3,500 calories.
And if you're saying, so if for a week you eat 500 calories more a day
Right.
than your body actually needs,
Right.
by the end of that week, if you store
Right.
500 calories
Right,
every day, by
right,
the end
right.
of that week, you will have gained 1 pound.
So that's what you're saying is 7 times 500 is 3,500. Straightforward
Exactly.
calories.
That's the calculation.
And these calories could be from any source.
Ultimately, they could be from any source, because in the end, it's calories. So all the calories get converted into calories in the end. So whether you're eating meat, or you're eating fruits and vegetables, or
right.
you're drinking oil,
Right.
in the end, it's the calories,
Right.
And the calories all ultimately get
Because
used
I
as fuel.
always thought that it probably is the fat which get deposited. So that's not the case. It's the total calories.
See, the body is very smart at changing one thing that you eat
Right,
into something
right,
else. So,
right.
so if you're not eating enough carbohydrates,
Yeah.
your body will actually take the protein that you're eating and change it into carbohydrates,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And
I
so
see.
there are a lot of systems that your body has to convert one nutrient into another.
Right. Right.
Because in the end, what you need is you need to burn fatty acids and glucose. Those are
Right,
the things
right,
that you can
yeah.
burn.
And this fat you're talking about is not saturated or unsaturated. This is
It's irrespective of that. There are some other qualities of different types of fats that can affect your immune system,
Right.
or your risk for
Yeah.
inflammation, etc.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's still calories.
I'm glad you clarified it. That I always had in mind that if you eat very rich fatty food, then is the calories are more serious, but is the total calories.
In the end, it's the total. You think of it as think of calories as the currency of body weight.
Right, right, right.
And managing your weight is like managing your bank account.
Right, right.
You have to know how much money is coming in, what is the bank doing with your
Yeah,
money, and how much money are you spending.
Very interesting.
And that's how you manage your finances.
But is there an easy way to calculate calories? I know on ready-made dinners you could see the calories,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. See, we don't have a natural instinct to judge calories,
okay.
right? You cannot look. We are very bad at looking at food and guessing what the calories is, because there's no way to do that, right? So unless you read the label,
Right.
or you look it up,
Right.
there are many internet sites. In fact, you can get applications for your iPod, which you can download, which if
Really?
you enter the food,
Right.
or actually the newest application, you take a picture of the food and
Right.
it tells you how many calories in the food.
Really?
So unless you do that,
Yeah.
you will not know how many calories you're actually eating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fortunately, most of us tend to pretty much eat the same things every day,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That's true.
And so if we don't have to learn all the calories of all
Yeah,
foods,
that's right.
we just learn the calories of the foods that we like to eat,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can pretty much calculate. And it's not about being so accurate, but you're getting
Right.
a rough idea, so that
Right.
if you know that you need 2,000 calories,
Right. Right.
well, really then you shouldn't be spending that on eating things that have 3,000 calories.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. So I'd like to talk a little bit on the subject that once you eat your food, and there are fats as well, something starts right in your mouth, saliva and enzyme, but there's no fat enzyme here. They have the stomach, is it?
Well,
what happens in the mouth? Just quickly, some digestive process.
well, the food that you eat,
Right.
first has to be broken down.
Right.
And so that's part of the chewing process.
Right.
And as you do the chewing process, it actually mixes with an enzyme called amylase, which is in
Right.
in your saliva,
Right.
which
Right.
actually starts the fat digestion.
Amylase I thought it's a carbohydrate, so it does something with the fat as well?
Well, actually, the digestion starts in this, with the carbohydrate
Right,
digestion.
Right. Okay.
Which is why if you take a piece of bread and you chew it for long enough,
Right,
it
yeah,
actually
it's
starts.
sweet. Yeah,
it
that's right.
turns into sweet,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
right, yeah.
the carbohydrate digestion actually starts
Right,
there.
Right.
And then it goes into the stomach, and then there's more digestion, and then it goes into the gut, where you have lipase, which
Right.
then starts digesting your fats.
Okay,
Again,
so
breaking it down
And this lipase come from the
from the pancreas.
pancreas.
Yeah, yeah.
So where does the bile from?
And then the bile actually allows the lipase, which breaks it into fat, to
Right.
become soluble, so that things can be absorbed and things can be digested. And in different parts of the gut, different things happen, and there's
Right,
a number of enzymes
right,
that play a
right,
role here.
Right, right.
So it is a complex process, but
Right, yeah.
the gut is actually very efficient in extracting nutrients from your food,
Okay, yeah.
right?
yeah.
Because it's designed for doing that.
It's pretty long too.
And the reason it's so long is because with the traditional foods,
Right.
if you're a hunter and gatherer,
Right,
and you're eating roots and berries and raw foods, etc., well,
Right,
then you
right.
need a long gut to actually fully digest those
That's
foods.
true, yeah.
Now, of course, if you're eating fast food, which is highly refined, well, then
Right.
you only need a few centimeters and you're done.
Very, very fascinating on this subject here. So going to now, of course, we touched a little bit already on the major causes of obesity, and you did mention about food, and we talked a little bit. So food is such a diverse subject, from simply because of the demographic things, and a lot of people and you have traveled all over the world. So tell us a little bit about your experience regarding food. For example, you are in Middle Eastern countries. What did you find there? Did you find their food was balanced, or you found a lot of people who were obese as well, or overweight as well? So
Well, one of the things when you talk about food is differentiating between traditional foods that people eat
right, and the parties.
and the food that is now
Right.
pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you go to Dubai, you
Yeah.
can get Kentucky Fried Chicken, you can get McDonald's, you can get all of the fast foods that
Right,
you want,
right, yeah.
which are not traditionally which
Yeah.
are not the traditional foods. Now, also in the traditional foods, one has to distinguish between the traditional foods that the normal person would eat every day,
Right.
which are usually different from the special traditional foods
Yeah.
that you would eat on special occasions.
And they could be locally grown.
And they're locally grown and they're locally produced, and
Right.
it's usually quite a bit of work
Right.
actually
Yeah.
producing those
That's
foods,
true, yeah.
cooking
Yeah.
those foods.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, if you take the example of Indian food,
Right.
When you go to a normal Indian restaurant here
yeah.
and you see the foods that are being eaten,
Yeah.
those are actually not the foods that
True.
the, you know, the poor fellow working, you know, working on the farms in
Right.
India actually eats every day.
Right.
You know, he's
True.
not busy eating tandoori chickens and
And
butter chicken every day. Now, what he's eating is dal roti,
Yeah, that's
you know, which is just, you know, some small little
Right,
lentils and a
right.
little bit of curd and a little bit
Right,
of
yeah,
onions, and
yeah.
then he has a roti,
Yeah.
which he has made himself on, you know, those are very simple foods.
Right,
That's what you
right.
eat every day.
Right. Yeah.
And on special occasions,
Yeah.
you know, when there's a, you know, there's a wedding, there's a celebration, there's a festivity,
Right. Right.
well, then you make the special foods.
Right. Yeah.
The problem is that now when we think of traditional foods, we're only thinking of those special foods,
That's true.
right?
That's true.
When you say, let us go for an East Indian dinner,
True. Yeah.
well, what you end up eating is the kind of food that you would normally be eating for a celebration.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But now, because those foods have become so common, even
Right.
when you go to India, they're eating those foods every day,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the problem starts. So most of the traditional foods, you have to differentiate between the everyday traditional foods,
Right. Right.
which are usually actually quite
Yeah.
simple,
Right. Yeah.
and the special
Special food.
traditional foods, which you
And-
only get in festivities.
And the way our civilization has changed, we eat more outside, and the restaurant food and fast
absolutely.
food, they all come into picture, and then you don't count the calories.
Well, nobody counts calories, right? And that's the problem. There's no calorie awareness. If I ask somebody, how many calories do you think you need?
Yeah. Yeah.
People have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
But is there any rough guideline? I mean, for
well, there's a rough
different
guide.
lifestyle?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the rough guideline here is that you are burning about 1 kilocalorie per minute.
1,000 calories.
1 calorie,
1 calorie
or 1,000 calories,
Right.
which is 1 kilocalorie per minute.
per minute.
Okay. So if we sit here talking to each other for
Right.
20 minutes,
Right.
each of us will have burned 20 calories.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we do that over 24 hours,
Yeah. Right.
that is 1,440 minutes. So say roughly 50.
Just not doing anything.
doing nothing,
Routine.
right? If you just sit there or you just do nothing, on average you will burn about 1,500 calories a day.
Right.
Now you can add to that the calories through activity,
Right.
which for most of us unfortunately are not a lot of calories because
Right.
we don't do a lot of activity.
Exactly.
So you can add 200, 300, 400 calories, and of course there are some differences in, you know, in your age,
Right.
or you know, even whether you're male or female.
Right.
There are some differences, but that is a rough example.
Right,
So
yeah,
most of
yeah.
us are probably between 1,800 to 1,000 calories is what you say is rough estimate.
And this is without any exercise or running or
Without
walking.
excessive exercise. Now, of
Excessive.
course, you know, if you're an athlete or if you're doing very hard labor, you can
Right.
burn 1,000 calories
Right. Right. Right.
in addition to that.
Right.
But for most of us who are quite sedentary, you know, if you say, you know, between 1,800 and 2,000
Right,
calories is
right,
probably
right,
where most of
yeah,
us.
yeah. So when you
Right.
went to some of the Middle East country, you have traveled extensively. Of course, there's a difference in the food and the type of food and the variety of foods which they eat. What did you find? Again, very high calories. Very good point you raised that normally we are not designed to count the calories.
No.
But what we are designed for is, as a hunter and gatherers, I like that term because I love to use. That's our instinct. So that's
Well, the
what-
instinct is to eat food when there's there.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, when you go back as a hunter and gatherer, you know, one day you get food, next day you don't. So when you have the food, you better eat it,
Right. Yeah.
right? And if you're not eating alone, but in a family or in a group of people, then you better eat fast, because you don't know whether the food is going to finish, right?
Really? So that's also
so that's also
in
there,
our
right?
circuit
So
here.
when you're hungry,
right.
not only do we tend to eat fast,
Right.
but interestingly, when we are hungry, we also make poor choices. See,
Mm.
when you come home in the
Yeah,
evening and you're
yeah,
starving,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
and you open the refrigerator,
Yeah.
you're not going to take the bag of carrots.
Yeah.
No, you will go for the leftover pizza,
Right.
right? Because, right? So eating when you're hungry means that you're going to make poor choices,
Yeah. Yeah.
which means you're going to eat the calorie-rich foods,
Right. Right.
and you will eat too fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem with eating too fast is that our digestive system and the signals that the gut sends to the brain that tell you that you have eaten are actually very slow.
Mm.
So it normally takes between 20 to 40 minutes after you starting the meal for your
Right.
brain to realize that you have actually eaten.
Really. Hmm.
And in those 20 minutes, you can do a lot of damage, right?
I
So
never realized. So it's a signal which goes from the stomach.
yeah. So when you're hungry, so the signal we talk about here is sort
Right.
of the balance system or the homeostatic system.
Right. Right.
When you haven't eaten,
Yeah.
you get hungry.
Yeah.
You eat.
But that's also hormones involved.
Those are hormones
in
involved in that, right? So there's a hunger hormone,
right,
makes you hungry.
right,
You eat,
right,
you feel full,
right,
so you call that satiety,
right,
and then you stop eating,
right,
right? So it's a hunger and satiety.
yeah, yeah,
And that is the system that regulates intake on a homeostatic level. Now, things are a little bit more complicated than that, because there is also another system
right,
that regulates food intake, and that is nothing to do with hunger and satiety. That has to do with appetite and reward. And that has to do with liking of food. So here's the story. So if you go to a restaurant and you've just eaten your 3 courses,
right,
and you're actually quite full, in fact, you're so full that you could not finish your plate,
right,
and then the guy comes and says, who's for dessert? And then shows you the dessert.
right, yeah,
And here's the chocolate cake. And then you look at the chocolate cake and you say, well, you know what, maybe I can try it. Okay?
right,
Why are
yeah,
you saying yes?
right, yeah, yeah,
You're full.
yeah, exactly.
So really you should not be saying yes.
Exactly.
But the reason that you're saying yes is because it is not your homeostatic system, hunger and satiety system.
That's separate.
That's a separate system. That system is full. Done. But the reason you're now saying yes is because there's another system in your brain, which is the reward system,
Right,
which
right.
tells you that if I eat a piece of that chocolate cake, it's going to make me feel good.
Really?
And
I
it's a
realize.
reward-seeking behavior. And that's a different part of your brain that does that.
Really?
And there is some interconnection, because
Yeah,
when you're
right, yeah,
hungry,
yeah.
you're also more likely to look for the foods
Right.
that make you feel good. And that is why when you're hungry, you will seek out the fat foods, the salty foods, the sweet foods, the energy-dense foods.
Because when you were talking of this chocolate and ice creams, you were talking about me.
Well, I'm talking about everybody, because that's the normal behavior, right? Those are foods that we eat for
But
pleasure.
never analyze it from that viewpoint, which you have given us the perspective that this actually is a separate system in a different part of the brain.
It's a different part of the brain. And interestingly, it's the same part of the brain that also does addictions. So
Really?
Smoking,
Right.
recreational drugs, but even other behaviors that are addictive are the same parts of the brain. And that's why you very often see that when people stop addictions,
Right, right.
like they give up
Right,
smoking,
yeah,
they do other
yeah,
things,
yeah,
they turn to food. And they use the foods in the same manner that they were using whatever drug they were using before. And they start putting on weight. So that is that addictive part of the brain that controls that eating behavior.
Right, right. Well, we'll talk a little bit more later on that. So on the subject of food, as I mentioned, you see a whole variety in different cultures, and you mentioned ordinary food which we eat versus special foods have become ordinary foods. So going to the, of course, types of foods, we did talk about the fat component and also the vegetables. And where is the balance when you eat the food? When human beings were hunter and gatherers, how did they learn that this is the balance you need? Well, they went for hunting and only got proteins, meat, for example.
Yeah. Well, well, one day you eat certain things and the other day you eat other things. Right.
Right,
And so
right.
there is a mix of the things that you eat. And you know, the technical term for humans are omnivores. We can eat anything.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Right?
right.
We can survive in the Arctic and
Yeah.
we can survive in the tropical forest.
Right, right,
Because we can take whatever foods are there,
right,
whether it is animal foods or plant foods, and we can eat them. And our body has this ability to
Right,
take the nutrients
exactly. Yeah.
and
extract
convert them
it,
into whatever it is that the body needs.
yeah. Right.
So when you eat a mixed diet,
Mhm.
you don't have to worry too much about what you're eating.
Okay.
But one does have to make sure that you're eating what they call the 3 food groups,
Right.
right? That you always have, there's enough plants and vegetables,
Right.
that there's enough meat, that there's
Right.
enough dairy products,
Right.
because those are really the things that you're trying to mix. Because if you have a balanced diet, that means that your body is going to get all the nutrients you
Exactly.
need.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you run into some deficiencies.
yeah. Does body has the ability to extract nutrient which it wants, preferably? Let's say I need more iron, for example, or something.
You know, actually, that does happen for some nutrients, that you
Mhm.
will get an upregulation of
Right,
systems that will
right.
preferentially extract certain
Right,
things.
right, right.
In most cases, however, most of the nutrients that we eat will actually get absorbed.
Right, right, right. Well, so quite interesting. So we might come back a little bit later, but now I'd like to talk a little bit on, say, factors like age and gender. We did talk a little bit on that, genetics, environmental factor. So with the age, as we go older, let's say from young child, of course, we go into adulthood, and when you're a teenager, anything goes, you know, you never worry on these things. And then of course, the sequence. So is there variation on obesity in your research? You're finding obesity, childhood obesity is there as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have now is that the children are getting more and more obese. When you mention age, I think one of the reasons that most of us find it more difficult to maintain our weight with increased age is not because we eat more when we get older. It is because our metabolism tends to slow down.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so when I was talking about 2,000 calories a day, that is really for a young guy.
Right. Yeah.
The rule of thumb here is that per decade,
yeah,
your actual energy requirements may fall by 100 to 150 calories. So if you go from age 20 to age 50, really at age 50 you should be eating about 400 or 300 calories less than you were eating when you were younger. Now, we don't normally change that.
Yeah.
And the reason we put on weight is because we continue eating the same amount of food as we were eating before, but our requirements has actually dropped.
And that's the point, you see, how to trigger that. Hopefully our program will help people to think about it, that metabolic changes come. So you said every 10 years, decade?
Yeah, but it's a gradual process, right? So
process.
If as a 50-year-old you're still eating the same amount of food as a 17-year-old, I can guarantee you that you're putting on weight.
It's a very important factor then to realize that as we age, then calories, we have to watch these calories. So the important thing is that you burn less then, and you store
burn less
more?
Because you burn less, and so what do you do with the extra? You store it.
Right. So age is one thing, and then gender.
Well, women tend to need less calories than men. Largely
they need less?
They need less calories than men.
But I saw more sugar addiction in
which is different, which has nothing to do with calories. That's the different part of the brain, right? The homeostatic part, which is about calories, how many you need. They tend to need less, largely because their muscle mass is smaller.
Right.
And the muscle is one of the tissues that burns quite a lot of calories.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know that women play such an important role. Of course, mothers and wives in our homes, that when they cook it, they want to make it as tasty as possible.
Of course.
And if you are especially young, married, then food is the #1 thing.
Yeah, when you have guests in your house and they're not eating, then you get quite
the social pressure on eating is
huge.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a sign of and that's part of the complexity. Most of our social activities, most of our social functions revolve around food.
Right. So genetics has to play a role as well?
Genetics plays a big role because genetics really determines your ability.
Right.
You can almost look at it as fuel efficiency.
Right, exactly.
Right? So if you have the genes that make you very fuel efficient, well then you need less calories.
Yeah.
And if you eat too many calories, you're going to store them.
Yeah.
On the other hand, also the things that we have discussed around appetite regulation, hunger regulation, all the hormones, all the receptors, all the factors in your brain that determine this, all of those things are regulated by genetics.
Exactly.
Right? There are many genes involved.
Right.
And so, of course, I can take anybody, if they have the genetics for obesity, and I put them in an environment where there is no food, they will starve.
But you haven't discovered a gene yet which say turn on?
No, there's not. There's lots of those genes, but each gene alone has quite a small effect.
Really?
Right?
Really?
But you can assume that most of us are programmed, genetically programmed,
to eat as well.
That when food is there, we eat it,
and
we try not to burn all of the food so that we can store some for later.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to continue the subject more. Well, fascinating. It's always a learning process that I hope you have picked up a few things. The thing which I picked up is that after every decade of 10 years, your metabolism slows down, of course, from teenager to 50. And I think that rationality and that understanding how our digestive system and brain works, hopefully we could control our obesity and live a healthy, longer life. We'll be back with more program on this subject. Thank you very much. This is Food for Thought program. I'm Mohyuddin Mirza, your host. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.